to do with any of that. Uh, no. Oh, that was funny. So if this is your first time, welcome, right? Because that has literally never happened in the history of churches ever. Although I want one of those t-shirts. Oh, sweet. Nice. Those are fantastic. All right, so you guys are going to see me in this next time. I will say that that was amazing, and that's probably the second time we've heard Metallica here, so probably not the last. But it was mentioned. Can you go to the slide with the QR code, bud? It was mentioned that our regular announcement people are sick with COVID, and so the announcement slides or the video wasn't made, so you're stuck with me. So just a couple of quick things. That QR code takes you to All Things Shift on our website that has all the stuff that's happening. But I just wanted to give you a couple of quick reminders before we jump into everything. One is that next week we will not be here at the building because we're going to be at the YMCA at our Serve Day. So every fifth Sunday through the year, every quarter, we cancel services and we go someplace and do something. And we're going to be at the YMCA. So at the YMCA, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. They're outdoors. If you've ever been by there, you know it needs it. So we're going to be there doing a lot of weed eating and power washing and stuff like that. And then there'll be another group inside painting. All right. So that's what we're going to be doing for the Y this time. And then our generosity jars are due this week. If you're new, you're like, what are generosity jars? So all year we have been saving up loose change, all right? And there's a big bucket back there. You can also go to the QR code. You can scan that. There's one there, and there's also one back there. And if you scroll down, there's a link where you can click generosity jars, and you can also donate online. 100% of that money is going towards holiday meals for people over Thanksgiving. And we put it on Facebook. We've got our menu, so we've figured out that we can feed a family for $15 a box, and they can have a Thanksgiving meal. And so the goal is to make as many of those boxes as possible. With whatever's left over, we're going to go to GRU and we're going to pay off people's utility bills because GRU's the devil. So actually, that's the challenger today, right? The owner of the 7 deadly sins, right? So those two things, just a reminder. So don't forget, next week we won't be here, all right? We'll be at the YMCA. The other day, my wife Tori and I were having dinner, and we were sitting around talking, and she mentioned something that I had been feeling internally, but hadn't been able to kind of like articulate yet. And she mentioned that something that she was really beginning to feel. Just back up a second. My wife and I have been in the church ministry for over 20 years, from northern Missouri all the way down to here. And she said that she was realizing that there was a lot more church trauma than she realized, and that she was dealing with. And I was like, you know what? That's crazy, because I have been feeling that too. Like, you guys, if you know me, you know I'm an emotional dude. I have a hard time not crying about certain things. It just is what it is. I've learned to own it. What are you going to do? And I was literally this past week. There's a guy on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. He's an artist, and he goes by Naked Pastor. And if you haven't seen him, I suggest that you follow him. And he's got a reason why it's called that. He's not actually. But he posted this thing about like deconstruction and church trauma and all this stuff. And I was watching this like in the middle of the day, and I just started crying because I was just like, he just named it and she named it. And the stuff that, and one of the things that we were talking about was that it's bubbling to the surface because for just like so many of you, that maybe the first time in a long time, or maybe the first time ever, whether you're here in person or you're watching online, that this is a safe space, like an actual safe space. And as much as it is for people, it is for us too. And the longer we're here, the further away we get away from fundamentalism, the more we realize just how unhealthy it was. And so then all of a sudden there's this like time for all of this stuff to come bubbling up, right? And then TikTok videos make you cry. And it's all of these things that we just push down and shove to the side because that's what we were told to do. That's just what you did, right? Because you had to keep going for the sake of the church. And when there's the ability to have that time and space for that stuff to come up, it comes up sometimes really powerfully, right? And I think that one of those things that most people have experienced to one degree or another, and I know that we've all experienced it, is the church's idea or the church's teaching on generosity. So we'd mentioned our generosity jars, right? That those are due today, and that was the reason that I chose to talk about this specific thing on this specific day, because so many of us have been guilted and shamed for things that are beyond our control. So today, we're wrapping up a 4-week series of talks that we've called virtue signals. And virtue signals are things that people like to flash up there so that others, they look good or whatever. I want you to think a certain way about me. Someone posts a certain thing. So what we've done, though, is we've taken certain things within the church that the church likes to talk about or put out there because they want to seem a certain way, and yet it creates something that's not that, right? This thing is supposed to be holy, and yet we've turned it into something that's not, right? So we talked about honoring each other, what it means to actually honor each other in a culture that calls us to not honor each other. That when we honor the image of God in each other, we actually honor God that way. And when we treat others as less than, we empty his name of the same thing and we dishonor God. That's what it means to take God's name in vain, right? Then we looked at the idea of institutional integrity, that how the church loves to talk about your personal sins and you should have integrity. But the moment you call us out on integrity, whoa. Anybody see Family Guy, that Peter Griffin? Whoa. You know what I mean? And last week, we looked at the idea. Bam, nailed it. And last week, we looked at the idea of what it means to be righteous, that idea of righteousness actually means to hear the cry of the oppressed. So this week, we wanted to look at that idea of generosity and the high pressure to give to the church. So did you know, I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit. This is how the sausages are made. Did you know that behind the scenes, that church staffs and leaderships actually have tithing lists and use those as a marker of spirituality? Did you know that? That church staffs, every church I've ever been a part of has had that. And we've had meetings about that. Let me back up. Let me say that for those of you that were part of Old Shift, that was not a thing with Old Shift either. Just so you know. And I will also let you know here that I have zero idea that there's a barrier there that we've created. I have no idea who gives what or who doesn't give. Okay, that's not a thing. Because what that does, all right, is that it creates this list of holiness based on what you give to the church. That's what it does. And then you know what that does? That then elevates those that have over those that don't. Even the whole tithing system that we've said is biblical, this idea of 10%, which you won't find in the New Testament anywhere. But this whole idea of 10% creates that structure, because I know people that can give 10% without batting an eye, right? It's no big deal. But I also know people, and have been there, that where 10% would mean that something's not getting paid. That we're not having water or lights, or we're not getting food, like we've been there. So then we have this tiered system of holiness based on tithing, on giving. And is that what Jesus is actually calling us to? Is he calling us to this holiness that's based on material wealth? Right? And all of this is doing is just creating undue stress on people where there shouldn't be, right? So is that what generosity is? No. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Right? You're welcome. Thanks for coming to Shift, everybody. Let's pray. So what I want to do this morning, I want to take a look at a passage that's been used over and over and over to pressure you into giving and really dive into it to see how we've actually missed the point. Go ahead and show that, bud. It's in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20, and it's up here on the screen. It says this: "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroy them, where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And the light you think you have is actually darkness. How deep that darkness is." Now, if you've been in church spaces long enough, you've heard that phrase, don't store up your treasures, right? Store up your treasures in heaven, don't store up your treasures here, right? And that's been used by pastors and leaders since who knows how long to guilt people into giving to the church, because if you want your heart where Jesus is, then you need to give to the church because that's where Jesus lives, right? And the more you love Jesus means the more you give, right? Because then that equals like, well, my treasure's over here, so I got to give more. So that's been used forever to make sure that you do that. And I can remember as a kid, right? As a kid, the more you give, the more you love. It's equated. It's hand in hand. Like, pastors can push back on that, but that's what happens. The more you love, the more you give, and the more you give, the more you love. And I can remember as a child, as a kid, sitting in church and my pastor teaching this to us and remembering, okay, well then I guess that's just what you do, and saying things like, if you really want to know what your priorities are, like your honest to goodness priorities, open up your checkbook and look at your register. As if paying bills or groceries are somehow sinful or less than, right? So we've all heard that before, okay? And I'm just gonna I'm gonna rebuke it. No, that's not what it's talking about. So we're gonna take that teaching, all right, that we've all heard, and we're gonna set it aside. We're gonna put it over here, all right? So what I want to do is I want to dive just a little bit deeper, because Jesus is not talking about giving to the church, okay? Number one, logically, the church didn't exist yet, okay? So no, he's not talking about giving to the institution, okay? So we need to set that over here. What he is doing is that he's telling us that we have to be mindful of what we do with our material wealth. That we do have to be mindful of it. How are we participating in bringing kingdom? And let me define that just so that everybody understands what we're talking about when we say kingdom. When we say kingdom, it means bringing tangible good to the people around us. Okay? So when we see Jesus saying the kingdom of God, right? Of course there's a spiritual side to that, but there's a side that we completely forget, and that's the here and now. So when we say, how are we bringing kingdom, that means, are we bringing tangible goodness to our city and to the people around us? So are we doing those things, right? Or are we not doing those things? And that's not a guilt question. It's not a shame question, right? It's an introspective question that we should ask periodically of ourselves and of ourselves as a community, right? Because we all have blind spots. You don't know what you don't know, right? And until somebody points those out. So these are things that we should be asking ourselves all the time. So I can remember listening to this, and at the time it made sense, right? Because of how they interpreted that. If you give, you love, right? That at least made somewhat sense. As I got older, we untangled it. But one of this in this section that made zero sense to me was the whole thing about the good eyes and the bad eyes, and the eyes are a lamp, and if you've got good eyes, it's great. If you've got bad eyes, and it's like, is Jesus telling me to go see an optometrist? Because I need something. Like I've worn progressive since I was in my 20s. So I had bifocals like 23 before they did the whole progressive. So that was fun in college. And then my wife, though, she has way worse eyesight than I do. And I asked permission because she wears Coke bottles when she takes out her contacts. And have you ever seen the googly eyes? That's what her glasses make. She does. I asked permission, so I'm just saying. But it can't possibly be talking about our eyesight, right? So what's he talking about? This is actually well documented in rabbinical history. This is a Hebrew figure of speech, good eye and bad eye, that talks about ayin tovah, which means a good eye, a good eye, or ayin ra'ah, which means a bad eye, all right? So the rabbis taught that you either had a good eye or you had a bad eye, and the difference between the two is all about how you see the world, all right? If you saw the world with a good eye, ayin tovah, okay, then you chose to see the world with a positive light. You chose to see things optimistically. You chose to see the best in a situation. So if we're taking this and we're looking at it theologically, and we're applying that to this story that we believe God is trying to tell all of humanity, then it starts at the very beginning of that story in Genesis chapter 1, where we see that a good God created a good world, and we get to participate in that good world, right? That's what that means. That's what it means to have a good eye, or ayin tovah. Now, on the other hand, is ayin ra'ah, a bad eye. So, like much of modern Christian doctrine, ayin ra'ah, a bad eye, that doctrine, that theology starts in Genesis chapter 3, all right? And in that creation poem, that creation narrative, that wisdom account, we see in Genesis chapter 3 what's referred to as the fall of humanity. So if somebody has a bad eye, they're choosing to see the world pessimistically, all right? All they see are the sin and corruption and the bad. They're choosing to not assume the best of others, but to assume the worst of others. And this is honestly about our heart. This whole teaching is about changing our inside, because how you see and interact with the world around you affects your heart. Like, you can't see the world as evil and then live with joy in your heart. Those two things don't go together. And so what Jesus is saying here is how you view the world not only impacts how you interact with people on a behavior level, but it also greatly impacts you inwardly. So I've known people like this my entire life. I grew up in the church, but it's been a while since I've really interacted with somebody like this. So recently, I met somebody that had a bad eye, and it's very clear. Now, I will say that this person loved Jesus, okay? We'll leave it at that. They loved Jesus, but the way they saw the world was horrendous, because everything was evil. Everyone was evil, right? The devil is waiting around every corner, waiting to jump out. There's a demon everywhere. Like, I can remember they were saying that they didn't want to leave this place of serenity that they were in, like this calm place, because they knew the moment they left this place that Satan was going to attack on the way home, driving in the car. Like, what? What are you talking about? Like, how do you live feeling that all the time? And I've known people like that forever, all right? And have you ever noticed that people that live that way, especially, I'm picking on us Christians, that people that live this way love to talk about how much God says, do not fear, do not be afraid, faith over fear, and yet live in fear of everything. That they're always coming to take this, or they're always the other, whatever. They're trying to take these rights or that right. They're always living in fear of something. Everything is a reaction of that fear. Yes, I think everybody here has. And there's always someone or something that's coming to do evil, right? And now listen, so listen to what Jesus said. Can you go ahead and show that next verse, bud? But when your eye is unhealthy, think about that, ayin ra'ah. When your worldview is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. What so many Christians do not understand is that what they're calling light is a deep, deep darkness that spreads throughout their entire body. It not only affects how you behave, It not only affects how you treat others, but it affects your very heart. If the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. So why do we so often choose to live that way? Why would anyone want to continually look for the bad in everything, right? I think that we can choose not to. I think it will probably bounce back and forth, right? You got to be careful about what you're consuming, about where you're placing yourself, right? Those are things that can help control. For me, it was in 2020, I turned off the news. I stopped watching the news. I read. I know what's going on. I'm still very active. I mean, if you know me, I've got opinions. I'm still very active and stuff, but I don't watch the news anymore because that was infecting my soul. And even if I agreed with what was being said, it affected my worldview, right? So I decided not to. I'm not going to see the world this way, all right? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to ignore the bad, right? Because we talked about that last week. Being righteous means to hear the cry of the oppressed. It means to do something about it. We hunger and thirst for that righteousness. So you can't ignore the bad, right? And be righteous or whatever. But we can't, and we can't have toxic positivity, right? Which is like the opposite side of that. Everything's bad, but everything is awesome. Well, no, it's not. You know what I mean? So we can't have that either. But to ignore, right? To altogether ignore the beauty of creation, the beauty of the image of God in all of us, right? What humanity can accomplish, the things that we're doing now, the world that we've created, and just ignore all of that? There has never been a better time in human history to live than right now. Think about that. There has never been a better time in human history to live than right now. We have greater access to healthcare and medicine and food, and despite all of the bad things, and there are bad things, there's never been a better time to live than right now, but we never hear that. It doesn't sell. Jesus said, when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. And the Greek for healthy here implies generous. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Your whole body is filled with light because you see and treat the world with generosity. So hear me when I say this. He's not talking about, this isn't about giving tithings or offerings to some local place. It can be a part of it, but it's not the point. Side note, when was the last time you heard a pastor say that giving to the church isn't the point? I never have, which is why I said it. So if you want to know real fast, if you want to know our attitude about giving to the church, here it is in a nutshell. If you see the work that we do in the community as good, be a part of it. If not, then don't. That's it. So this past summer, my gym closed, and you've heard about it. But I have taken it harder than I thought I would. Not because I didn't find another place to work or to work out. I did, but because of the people that were there. So I was talking about this past week. Have you ever had a season in your life where everything just kind of clicked? Where things just kind of came together and happened? That was one of those times where life or whatever just kind of brings this group of people together, and it almost seems random, but it just like clicks. Things happen, and it's just like, how did that happen? And then you try to recreate that, and you can't do it because it didn't just happen. You know what I mean? Every day, I got to start my days with some of my best friends. Every day, Monday through Friday. And how awesome was that? I mean, how blessed was I to be able to do that? Right? That every day, I got to start my days with a group of people that saw life generously. And then they poured that light into me. And I walked away, like I had to get up at 4 a.m. to do that. But the rest of my day was just like, I made it through the day because people just poured into me. They brought that into my life, and I miss that. I miss seeing those people every day, you know? People that see the world this way, and then they bring that to you, It's like that. It's not that the world's problems or your problems have gone away, but it's like when you interact with people that see the world this way and then bring that to you, right? That your problems feel like they're not as hard to carry. Like the burden's still there. Like you still got stuff, but it's just not as hard to pick up and take with you. How you see the world affects how you treat people. How you see the world affects how you treat yourself. If you see the world and yourself from a healthy eye, from a Genesis 1 perspective, a good God creating a good world, then we will treat the world, others, and ourselves generously. We participate in bringing kingdom come, and we get to be a light for the others. And what if generosity really is more than about church offerings? Like if you continue to read this section, Jesus talks about not worrying. He talks about not worrying about what you're going to wear or what you're going to eat. He talks about not judging others, and it all culminates in how we treat others and then in good and bad fruit. So what if generosity isn't just being reduced to just like how much do you give to the church, but maybe all of those things happen because it starts how we see the world generously? What if those things do not occur if we have that bad eye? What if none of those things happen? What if none of that good fruit is ever born in Gainesville or the surrounding areas because of how we see the world? What if, now listen, there are things that are outside of our control, right? There's nothing we can do about our economy, really. It is what it is. We are in this economy for whatever it is. So, but what if we decided to live within our own sphere of influence this way? What if we decided to bring that light to others? And what if we work for the betterment of all people around us, not just some? So growing up, this was all just for us. It was just spiritualized. Light was spiritual light. Good fruit, bad fruit was all spiritual fruit. But the older I get and the further away from fundamentalism I am really beginning to understand just how tangible the teachings of Jesus are. That Jesus isn't talking about some ethereal, far-off spiritual truth. He's talking about real solutions in the real world. That if we treat people this way, it'll make changes. You either have ayin tovah, a good eye, or ayin ra'ah, a bad eye. So the time of reflection today, I think, has to be centered upon that idea of how do we treat the world? How do we see others? How do we see ourselves? Do we see each other and the world and ourselves generously, or do we do it stingy, unhealthy? Yesterday, we tabled at Gainesville's Pride Fest. Thanks to everyone that participated. My wife and I, we wore free mom and dad hug t-shirts, and it was her idea. So, and we gave away lots of hugs, and but there was one particular one. And I'm not even going to pretend like I'm surprised, because it was a young person. Couldn't have been more than like 16, 17, 18 years old. They were with a group of friends, and we stood out in front of the tent, and we're handing out water bottles. We handed out like 1,000 bottles of water yesterday. And they saw my shirt. They took the water, and then they just stopped for a second and looked at me and said, "Can I have a dad hug?" I said, "Yup." And I gave them a hug, but they grabbed onto me, and then they whispered, "I love you." Now, I have no idea what has gone on in a young person's life to make them tell a stranger they love them because of a hug. But I am so thankful that we got to be a light for that person. I am so thankful that we saw the world generously and showed up in a space that needed generosity. Now, I may never see this person again, but I thought to myself that that's what generosity looks like. That's what treating the world generously looks like. It's not just some check that we write. It's how we live. It's how we live in relation to those that are around us. So, this morning as we gather around like the symbolic table of Jesus, let's be reminded of how generous Jesus is with us. Right? Of the love that he gave, of the healing that he brought for humanity. He didn't hoard it. He gave of that love, that healing to anybody that was willing to receive it. Right? He wasn't stingy, but instead offered himself generously for all of us, all of our humanity. We're gonna end slightly different today. There's not gonna be a Metallica. Although there are a few songs I think we could use. I'll talk to you later. Yeah. But I've asked Hannah to come back up and read something that she wrote. So if you're friends with Hannah on Facebook, she posted this last week, and again, it was one of those moments where, with all of the internal stuff that's going on, it was a gut punch, and I sat there and cried for a second, and this is a lot of crying this week, and I asked her to share that with us for our time of communion. So what we're going to do is that she's going to read this poem, and just reflect on, put yourself in the place of the person that's in this poem interacting with God. And after it's over, Peter's going to be playing quietly, and just use that as the reflection time. And when you're ready, if you're ready, you can take we have the little communion cups, take those, and then the band will sing us out. So
this is called Meetings with God. God sat beside me. She smelled like fresh cut grass. And I remembered reading once that the smell is how the grass cries out under the blade. But to me, it just smelled like summer. And he seemed content to sit, but I never am. So I asked, what should I do? And they said, honey is made in times of plenty to bring sweet things in times of need. So I took that to mean my work was all that mattered. I flew from bud to bud, storing up my safety, sealing off everything I earned. But when winter came, it wasn't enough. Then God returned and sat beside me. This time, she smelled like firewood. And even though I knew the logs blazed on their way to ash, to me, it just smelled like stillness and snow. Why am I so lost? I cried. I stored so much of my purpose into these tight spaces. And he shed one tear that hissed when it hit the flame and said, honey, you stored the wrong thing and neglected the sweetness within. Ashamed, I coasted like a leaf to the ground, but the soil was rich and my legs stretched hungrily down. While I took root, God spread out a blanket and they dropped to the earth, sighing sweetly. And that's when I learned God has all the time in the world for watching hardy things grow.